The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. I'm Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. We have a pretty interesting topic this week, something to dive into that is just slightly different than what we normally do. And yet at the same time, this is everything we normally do. And by this, I mean, we're going to be diving into, let me put it this way. I often talk on this channel about the fact that cultic activities or coercive control can make itself known or appear in lots of different places. We tend to think about cults in a religious sense, some culty religious group like Scientology or something like that. But there are groups that have nothing to do with religion that still bring in all the same coercive practices and techniques and methodologies, whether it's an acting class, whether it's a martial arts dojo, or whether it might be a group involved with learning about Tantra and sex. Happens there too. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say that groups that get involved with things that are pretty hot topic items may have a proclivity to attract more of this kind of overbearing, overwhelming kind of behavior than, say, a Girl Scout troop. I may be wrong about that, but it's my take on things. So this week, we're going to be diving into such a group and not only kind of what happened there, but what some members of this group did to try to push back and recognize what was going on. And hopefully from this, we can learn maybe some red flags, some things that come up that we should be watching out for when we're going to be getting involved in some new activity or exciting new club or some new membership thing that's going to give us some emotional or physical or financial reward. Let's have our eyes open and our ears, for what could potentially go wrong in such situations. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So for this, I am welcoming Dave Booda and Cara Cordoni. Hi, welcome to the show. There's no special organization or anything here. There was a little bit of a project you guys were involved in, which I'm sure we will talk about. But it's not like you guys are, formal professional cult busters or something like that. So now that I'm introducing you, why don't you go ahead and take the lead and tell us about yourselves?
All right, I'll jump in. So I'm Cara, and my experience with the International School of Temple Arts began back in April of 21. So my setup was having a COVID partner and then a big breakup. And so being in that seeking mode, in particular, seeking healing around intimacy and relating. And so that's where my journey began. And we'll get more into that, but I'll let Dave introduce himself.
Oh, that's so quick. I have been a part of, I would say, the sacred sexuality community, which some people would say Tantra, some people would say Neo-Tantra. But kind of the intersection of sexuality and spirituality, also the sort of personal growth as it relates to sexuality and kind of developing that part of ourselves. I've been involved in that world for about 15, 16 years. And there was a sort of especially large public outcry about this group that Cara mentioned, ISTA, International School of Temple Arts, in mid-2022, and I got involved because I had friends on both sides of it, and I think the ISTA is probably the apex predator of the Tantra space, and I felt like, if we could make some changes or if we could highlight some things that they're doing that were good and bad, and people could understand that more, that we'd have a better, larger community. And so I thought that was worth my time, and I got involved, and here I am on this podcast 3 years later.
Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, it's
Didn't
funny,
expect that, but
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, people don't appreciate being victimized, and they don't appreciate being lied to, and they don't appreciate being manipulated. And so I think it's, kind of a sign of the times that people are kind of sick and tired of that and are pushing back on it. And you guys actually formed up a project, sort of an organized effort to take this group on and do something about that, which I found very admirable. A lot of situations people get involved in, they will eject, often after a lot of self-doubt and recriminations, and is it me, is it them, is it me, is it them, and the group is of course telling them it's them, because the groups, when you have a malicious or oppressive or coercive situation, then part of that picture is the group never takes responsibility for anything, or the leadership never takes responsibility for their own, bad misdeeds. So, so this is interesting to me that this project happened and that there was all this pushback. And so what is this all about? How does a tantric sex education, enlightenment group go off the rails, and what does that look like in the first place? I'm very unfamiliar with this world, and not particularly backed off on hearing about it. I'm very open and interested in this, but I know nothing. So maybe we should start with that baseline, because I'm going to assume my audience is not really fully, embedded in this community either. So maybe we should start with that.
Yeah. So I think speaking to like how ISTA came on my radar, I took an online intimacy course. And during that, there were some chats and meeting with different people and breakout groups. And so somebody in that class mentioned the International School of Temple Arts. And so I went on their website and I thought, wow, this is really exciting. They call themselves a mystery school. The first level is the sexual shamanic spiritual experience. And it's a week long. It's at a retreat center. It's a group. So we're coming right out of COVID. So I've been in isolation. I've been in isolation with a problematic partner, and now things are opening up. And I thought, wow, what a great time to take the plunge. I sent the link to my best friend. She was like, "This looks crazy. Let's do it." And, I did a little bit of poking around and research, but I noticed that my own propensity to discount red flags started from the beginning. And I think that speaks, to the attachment to the outcome, the excitement and anticipation of what we think we'll get on the other side, that had me like asking questions and making checks, but then actually discarding the results, right? In retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, I clocked all of that. So I went to my first ISTA April of 2021 here in Northern California, a few hours from where I'm located. And it was really, really exciting. It was a huge group. There were about 70 of us in this time. And everyone was like really friendly and beautiful and kind of welcoming, and the sense that, the journey began as soon as you signed up. And so it's this ongoing revelation process. And as a mystery school, very little is shared in advance. So, like, there's a huge amount of trust and going into it, because not very much is revealed in advance. So I was like, I'm willing to be in the experience and go through the process. One of the first activities that we do is gather in a large circle and talk about the agreements that are going to be in place for this experience. Some facilitators do send the agreements in advance as like a Google form, but not everybody does. Sometimes it's really sprung on people. And the things that stood out, well, one was funny. I thought, oh, it's not culty because there's three facilitators, two women and a man. And so I noticed where that made me feel safer, and I assumed that meant something that it doesn't necessarily mean. The other thing that came up right away was an agreement to take 100% responsibility for your experience. And that comes up in a lot of problematic groups. We can definitely break that down, but the short piece of it is that basically it gives them a position where they don't have to take responsibility for anything because everybody is taking 100% responsibility. So that trap gets sprung. The one that was pretty shocking in the agreements was that they said, unlike other organizations, we don't prohibit sexual interactions between facilitators and attendees. And the reason is that we know that in the rest of the world, there are rules about that, but those rules get broken and they get broken in secret. And so instead of perpetuating that, we want to bring it into the light and be very intentional. And part of that is facilitators not approaching participants. They don't initiate. And also that of the three facilitators, they would, as a group, under the group gaze, determine whether it was in the best interest of the participant to engage sexually with the teacher. So that was shocking because you're all kind of already there and not aware that that's going to be part of the dynamic. But I also noticed where I didn't really reject it. I thought, that's an interesting proposal. I wonder how that plays out. So there's a process of takes over an hour to go through 20 some agreements. Another one that stands out for me is the agreement to let other people have their experience. And the idea being if someone's crying, you don't need to offer them tissue or you don't need to go give them a hug. That might be driven by your discomfort more than their need. And so allowing people to have their experience and then articulate if they have needs versus intervening. And it sounds reasonable enough. What I felt in myself and I felt play out was a reduction in acting on empathy, a reduction in engaging with others in their difficulties because I wanted to do it right. And doing it right meant I had agreed to let other people have their experiences. So that is an interesting influence on the nature of the container, so to speak.
Interesting. A couple questions. Of course, it occurs to me that nothing you're signing here saying I'm taking 100% responsibility for my experience would be legally binding in any real sense in terms of, well, then, the facilitator walking up and punching you in the face would not relieve him of having committed a criminal act against you, right? I mean, so it's but it sounds more of a mind game.
Yeah, I mean, I think if in that situation the facilitator punched you in the face and you were upset about that, it might go in the direction of, well, clearly your internalized aggression attracted that to you, so you're responsible for the fact that they punched you in the face.
Right. Okay. So it is that kind of a setup then, because that's responsibility is a concept that almost every coercive figure will somehow corrupt. Sometimes very blatantly, and sometimes much more subtly. I would consider this a pretty subtle approach, in that it frames it as this very innocuous sort of, oh yes, of course you're responsible for your experience. But then when the rubber meets the road, if somebody does something wrong to you or even illegal to you, now we're going to break this agreement out and use it to sort of browbeat you into shutting the hell up about what just happened to you, right? Because it's your responsibility, because you need to be responsible for this. And that's really just a sort of a subtle lead up to blaming the victim. I'm wondering, but is that what's going on here? Is that how this plays out?
That's how I've seen it play out, both individually and with other folks who reported harm. And even folks who had been harmed and then would approach for an attempted repair and say, hey, I want to take 100% responsibility. I even consented to that. And I'm having feelings about it now that let's unpack, and then being shut down, that there's not really an appetite to do that.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. I get that. Totally get that. And I can definitely see how it could be used to, subvert and dominate people. I mean, that could definitely be used in that way, right? Always context specific. The other one, of course, the other one that is a troubling context is this one about the leaders being able to just engage. Now, the wording there seemed to imply, though, that it would only ever happen if a community member came to the leadership, and then the leaders or the moderators or how the people running the thing, they all agree. Oh yes, go go do it, right? And so therefore you have these kind of two levels of controls so as to avoid sexual predation on the part of the moderators, right, or the leaders.
Facilitators, yeah, is usually the language they use.
Yeah. So sorry, I mind blanked on that word. Yeah. So facilitators. So it sounds like, well, we've got these controls in place, so you're safe, and we're never going to sexually predate you, right? We're not going to prey on you. And yet, I'm imagining in real life something different plays out.
Yeah, so the my understanding of the history of what we call the sexual protocols was that there was always started with the assumption that the facilitators or the leaders could interact sexually. There were some problems with that, and so there was a refining process to say, oh, well, let's allow it just to be participant initiated. So, there's been some changes over time, most recently based on the process we've been through with ISTA. The sexual protocols preclude sexual activity in level 1 between facilitators and students. So that has been a change to present. And so, but based on feedback I've had, or we received reports of harm and talked to different people, one woman shared that the facilitator approached her, like to have a conversation, and then kind of was like, wink, wink.
That's, yeah, that stuff right there, right? Yeah, because you have this wiggle room, and then the wiggle room becomes, that you might as well not even have the rule at all. So these kind of things can happen in the reality of the situation. And so I wanted to.
Yeah, so that definitely got feedback on that. And then it wasn't until later where I thought, oh, well, what's the relationship between these three facilitators? There's a lead facilitator usually and a couple of co-facilitators. And so, what's their relationship, and how do they actually call each other out to say, no, this isn't in the best interest? Like, how often does that actually even get shut down because there's power dynamics among the leadership?
Right. And of course, being facilitators, there's an automatic power differential, right? Which is the reason why the rules tend to exist of, hey, let's not do this, because you can't pretend a parody when there isn't one. You just can't. And
Well,
in the moment, people get caught up in it, and then they justify it, right?
yeah, I mean, part of the narrative was, well, we're just people too, right? Like, I'm also just a human with attractions, and I love to have experiences. Um, and as one facilitator put it, she's like, oh, in retrospect, I think what we've done is rather immature. And this is about us maturing into recognizing that we're in positions of power and that we've been downplaying that or ignoring that level of influence and power dynamics. And we intellectually thought we could just get away from it, or, not participate, versus understanding the power of position as a facilitator.
Yeah, it's kind of an important thing. Yeah. Okay, cool. So those are just two questions I had just based on some of those agreements you were talking about, and clearly there's this laid out protocol. So that's interesting. So they had rules, they had some structure in place of what was okay and not okay to do, and it sounds like reasonable stuff. But then what happened?
So then it gets pretty intense pretty fast. So um, the first evening in my training, and again, they vary a little bit based on facilitator. It's part of not really having a central control mechanism. They call themselves an organism versus an organization. And there's a lot of, it's kind of like having a bunch of contractors versus having employees. And so there's a lot of disparateness in how different facilitators execute the training, or even organize things, or include or don't include exercises. But this one was a pretty standard one called Horse and Rider. And the invitation is to have a conversation between your mind, which is the rider, and the horse, which is your body intelligence. And so the facilitators will do a demonstration, or a transmission, as they call it, and they will perform and demonstrate. So in this case, one female and then one male facilitator step into the center of the circle and start talking, about their thoughts about their body, and talking about, how they feel about their body from an intellectual place. And as they're doing that, they might be starting to take pieces of clothing off. And then they switch to speaking from their body intelligence. So what does the body have to say in reply to the mind? Um, and then they're generally fully nude and talking, about challenges they have one way or the other, how their mind thinks about their body and what their body wants to say. And you're broken into groups of three to then perform this activity, and invited. If you want to keep your clothes on, that's fine. Um, and a lot of people start pushing their comfort level to see, can I get comfortable with this? But it creates a lot of psychological stress, just because it's, edgy and exciting and unusual. And it kind of creates intensity from the beginning. Um,
Titillating. It's interesting. It's novel. It's a new experience for sure. And the conditions have been set, so it's private and confidential and all of this. Yeah, per all these agreements, right?
yeah.
Times.
Yeah. And then it just keeps rolling from there. So the days are pretty long, involving some kind of teachings or lecture style, but a lot of practices. And especially in the first couple days, there's practices around consent. There's practices around talking about boundaries, talking about they have an RBDSM, which is a conversation about like your relationship status, your boundaries, your desires, um, your sexual history, like, what if you have any STIs, for example. So it kind of creates a structure to be like, here's a great way to engage in conversations before you get involved physically with each other. And so there's some really useful tools, some really thoughtful explorations that take place in those first few days, during which time the agreement is that we're not interacting sexually with each other. It's called the closed field, and it's really about feeling ourselves and you know being in touch with our own process and generating our sexual energy for ourselves, um, which
Okay.
again, yeah, still can be really edgy. There's, kind of a self-pleasuring group activity in within a couple of days. Um, and there's an exploration activities like idealized parents. So being in a group of three and you're a little baby and you get to tell your mom and dad like what it is you wish they had said or recognized, or addressing a core wound in some way. And so it creates a lot of intimacy. There's a little bit of, touching on potential trauma. As the intensity increases, I think it leans into a little bit of trauma bonding, depending on how deep or raw or vulnerable you are. Um, and so, yeah.
Just cut you off for just a second, only because I've used that term in a very specific way in terms of alternating cycles of reward and punishment to bond, trauma bonding being like a coercive tool. But I believe you're using it in a more um, common vernacular. I think they use it more of we're bonding on the fact that we have shared trauma.
Right.
Okay, good. Just want to clarify that because I've used that term in the past, and I want my audience to.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds like fairly. I mean, I did want to say it sounds like when with boundaries and consent and all these various things, they're hitting all the right boxes. I mean, they're checking off all the right things you would expect and want a group that's going to be engaging in sexual behavior or borderline sexual behavior to touch on. I mean, these are all the things. Yeah, right. I knew about consent and this and that. I mean, it's all very structured, and I understood everything that was going on while it was happening. So, how could something go wrong? Well,
Right.
nodding. So I'll just let you carry on here. But I just thought I'd. Yeah, sounds good so far. But I know this is going to go really bad, really fast. So please carry on.
Yeah. I mean, I spoke with one gentleman who had been, and he was like, I don't understand how these violations are happening because we talk about consent and boundaries. And I was like, okay, so we did an hour of a talk about, practicing saying yes and saying no. And we did an hour about, boundaries and desires, or a few hours. But when you consider the actual conditioning that we're coming in with, a few hours around those and even just feeling into them is not going to equip most of us with, I think, the exquisite skills we would need to stay safe in the container that gets created. I mean, that was my experience. And I think I had been hopeful that the pace would really be going deep and slow around those items, as the online course I had done had really been very thoughtful, very research based, different skills. But was like, oh, that we do check those boxes, but we're also in such an intense, stimulating, overstimulating environment that it's questionable as to how accessible those, especially for some of us, new skills are as you get in more deeply. Um,
Let me ask you a question real fast, because some of this is pseudotherapeutic as well. I mean, some of what you mentioned there is, is this sort of thing you'd expect to be doing in a therapeutic session. What would the business with sorting things out with your parents, for example. I mean, I recognize those modalities from therapy. So it's interesting to find them in a tantra group, right? And I go, okay, that's interesting. Again, titillating, emotionally stimulating. There would be purposes for doing that, but I don't know that it's a therapeutic environment or set up exactly that way with trained licensed professionals who are engaging in therapeutic modalities. So so my alarms are going off right now already on some of this stuff. I just, but lining up these, I wonder then with this sort of, I don't want to say, um, lick and a promise approach to consent and boundaries. But it sounds like, yes, they're checking off the boxes for the sake of saying they're checking off the boxes, as opposed to really checking off really diving deep, like you mentioned, on this stuff. And then they rev it up to some kind of intensity. Let's go ahead and get into that, because I'm curious how they went about doing that.
Yeah, so one of the agreements is to use the tools that they teach during the course of the retreat. And so there's eight major tools, or seven or eight, and they're all very activating. So it starts with like hand screaming and tantruming, pounding, pillows. The one that tends to be really activating for people is pillow thrusting, where you're basically put a pillow on the mat or the bed, and can I swear?
Okay.
All right, you're basically fucking the pillow. So you're doing all this, and they call them all emotional release tools. So the idea is that you're releasing the emotion, um, and there is truth. I think when you do that long enough, you release a lot of stuff because it exhausts you. Um, and so there's, yeah, seven of these emotional release tools that were taught. And in my experience of having been through level one a couple times, that there's usually really emotional and intense music, almost like movie soundtrack crescendo intensity happening, and it's really loud. And you're in a room now with maybe 40, 50, up to 70 crying and screaming and thrusting and pounding people. And so for some people, that right there is incredibly dysregulating and problematic. And of course, you're asked to stay in the room, you're asked to trust the process. You are not restricted to the room, but the influence and the is like stay in the room and move through it. um and for myself, as someone who tends, has like a theater background, and I love being all in, and I want to get my value, and I see that as like really committing. And so I'm pounding pillows and screaming and doing the breath work, and I get really high. Like, I'm like, whoa, I feel amazing. And that tends to trigger in me kind of an Energizer bunny crescendo. So now I'm really excited. I'm really in. My critical thinking is largely not available. I'm in my body. I'm in the experience. Kind of out of my mind, but I like it. And so I keep leaning in, you know? Um, and so the idea is that as we go through these different um, practices, that if you are having uncomfortable feelings, you're that you would then go do a pillow scream or hand scream. And so all very activating practices, not in when I was there, not very much down regulation, not very much integration time. It's like practice and learning and eating break and relating with people. And now we're back and it's going to go into the evening. And so I found in my experience just, yeah, becoming really energizer bunny, starting to sleep less, somewhat based on their agenda, but not exclusively, kind of based on getting really energized and wanting to keep relating. So somewhat of a hypomanic state to some degree. Um, yeah. And Dave, you've been through these activities. I'm wondering if you want to chime in on your
Quietly.
experience a little bit.
What did
Sure.
you experience of this?
Well, the short story about why I ended up there was after a lot of the work we did with some of their leadership. There was myself and one of our project mates had not been to a training, and so they said, "Hey, if you want to come as a guest." And our other friend was like, "No, thank you." And at the time, I was like, "No, thank you." But then I thought about it, and I was like, "All right, like, uh, this is not my first rodeo in this world and that, and let's go for it." So I went and I went with the uh, I honestly did go with an open mind. Like I know that it could be very easy to say, well, come on, you're just gonna go and like sit in the corner with your arms crossed. And I didn't, I pounded some pillows, I cried, I did, I was in it, I had my brain still turned on, because I've been through a lot of those kind of intense experiences before. I was in the military. There's certain things that kind of prepared me for spaces like that I can hang. And so anyway, so I went, and that allowed me to kind of really understand this training and this method. But it actually also drew a line for me back to Landmark, because I had done 2 Landmark forums, advanced course, couple seminars, as well as I did 2 Mankind Project weekends. I did some other things that are all, I come to find out later, classified as large group awareness trainings, which I want to also thank Cara for bringing to my attention this. Cara is the research wing of our project. Um, and then that's how we met John Hunter. And honestly, once that piece came in, that explained everything. But I and since I wrote a pretty long, detailed piece about ISTA, large group awareness trainings, and understanding that model last fall, and a lot of people have read it, and I've talked to so many people, and maybe 2% of people had even heard of the idea of large group awareness trainings that were going to these trainings.
Right.
And I live in Southern California. You could throw a rock and hit a large group awareness training. I mean, it is in California, it is so prevalent.
Yep.
And I have heard too that it basically comes from Scientology, but that's something that I'm sure you and I could talk about it. That's interesting. But yeah, but so, you know, that connection was everything. The way I've described ISTA to people in a very simple way, which they don't like, of course, but is I say it's Landmark with sex. It's Landmark. It's just fucking Landmark. Like I don't know what to say. I I went to 2 Landmark forums. I didn't have a bad experience there. And now when I look back, I understand what they're doing is a better business model than it is a way to actually transform people's lives. And I
Well, there
think,
we go. And that really gets to the heart of the matter right there, right? So let's talk about that a bit. Um, Actually, before we get to that though, I would like to finish. What is this thing that they're doing? How many days were y'all there?
yeah.
So they're generally 7, sometimes 8 days.
Long time. That's a lot of workshopping. Um, During that time, is it formally led up to now we're all having sex, or is that just kind of no? That's not part of or.
It- there isn't like the point of all of this is we're going to have a huge orgy. That's not, yeah. But what does happen is after the 3 days of having a closed container or closed field, then on like night 3 or 4, they open what they call temple evenings, which is after the teachings. Sometimes there's like an invitation for everybody to come and maybe some activities to warm up that space. But ultimately, it's like a dance party, cuddle, puddle, potentially moving into to heavier sexual activities based on individuals. Um, and in my first level one, it was not really that spicy or crazy. People were, really trying to connect and relate and stretch themselves. And so I think that especially in level one is more the case. Now, I will say level two, I think is a different story because when you reach level two, you've already been through level one. You may have been through multiple level ones, and you've got to be approved to move on to level two. And so you have a different audience. There's no newbies in level two, right? And so the intensity is ratcheted up, and we can talk about that later. But I do think it's, as you go deeper, the intensity and the sexual interactions do increase.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
So good. So we're not talking about just, days and days of just wild abandoned sex. It's much, much, much more technique driven than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like days and days of like therapeutic, or they would call them like rituals, right? So ritual can be any activity, really. And so this is your family ritual of, healing some family stuff. And then there's what they call aspecting, which is the idea of, putting a pillow across from you and you're having a conversation with your grandfather. And then you switch positions and you assume the position of your grandfather and you imagine what your grandfather might say. And, usually those are really insightful because in one of those positions, you surprise yourself. Stuff comes out or evolves out, and you're like, oh, I never thought I would have said that. Or, wow, that gives me more compassion for my grandfather. But again, it's getting into what are really therapeutic areas without the licensure, the awareness of what could go wrong or what do we do when things go wrong in those interactions. And so often when things go wrong, it's go practice the tools and then talk to me after maybe. Um, and like so many of these, there's just this process where a lot of it is just turned back on yourself. And there's this idea that you're sovereign, and we talk about sovereignty. And so I think there's a lot of assumptions and kind of pressures about, oh, if I'm sovereign, then part of it is also figuring this out on my own. Um, that happens.
Yeah, it sounds a little tricky to me because there's a conceptual dichotomy there, which is I'm here to form connections and community in a way that I never have before. and become closer to other people and become closer to myself, or more aware of myself in a way, and have transformative experiences as a result of all of this connection and experience. I mean, conceptually, that's kind of what everybody's there for. Oh, but by the way, if you have any issues or problems, you're in a vacuum and you're all by yourself, and you better figure it out, because we're not here for you. And it seems like that's a pretty toxic dichotomy to have, that, yeah, it's great. As long as everything's great, we're all connected and together. But the second there's a problem or an issue created by all of this communal work, oh, hey, you're on your own, figure it out. And that seems to be the basis of an awful lot of where this conflict came from, that formed this, you guys pushing back on this.
Right.
Right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we push back on the subtle level, right? In terms of the nuance. I said at one point, it was like, it's not that you can't say that we need to be 100% responsible for our experiences. I think that there's guardrails on how is that idea even well used, because it's a tool, it's a concept, and it can be used to help and it can be used to harm. And if we're not talking about the right use of these ideas, then we're leaving room for the misuse and misunderstanding. And unfortunately, that's actually serves their whole system versus serving the individuals who are coming and being trusting and investing and, opening themselves up.
Exactly, because it's basically like we want all the rewards of therapy or a pseudo-therapeutic environment that we're going to create here. We want all the benefits of that, and we want all the money from that. But then if something goes up slightly awry, oh, it's not our responsibility. We don't have anything to do with that. That's you. You go deal with that. That sounds like a you problem. It's like, well, wait a minute. You created the entire situation here to create a peak experience or a series of peak experiences. And when there's some negative consequences from that, guess what? You have some responsibility for that. You induced it. So that's a very big problem, I would imagine. Anyway, Dave, I'm sorry. I totally just kind of butted in on this whole thing with this. Please.
There's so much to say.
There is, and I just can't I can't stop commenting on it because, of course, all the culty stuff is just, it's right here. So
I'll do my best here. So one of the contexts is why we got involved the way we did is that Cara and I and other folks in the 3SA project have a lot of close friends who are very involved with this group, which is kind of rare. At this point, some of those friendships have been strained. Let's be honest here, and that's not been fun. But I'm gonna paint this in a light that does the most I can to try to like have those people. I'm not talking about all people within the organization, but like I'm gonna do my best here. Not that these people are listening to this, probably at this point they've tuned out, but it's like I'm gonna try to make them look good and try to have us understand that anybody in their shoes, given the system that they are running, is going to create these outcomes. And I'll also say too, for context, that this organization was started in 2007, 2008 by someone that I don't even think he would disagree when I call him a sex addict. Okay. This guy is, I also call him a man child. He probably wouldn't agree with that, but this guy has a very bad reputation in the sacred sexuality community. You just whisper his name and you will hear stories about him, especially back in the day when he started this thing. Now he lives on a boat and he kind of doesn't, he's kind of out, not talking. He's much more removed. So the reports of harm are less because he's realized some things. But this guy is awful, in my opinion. Okay. He's also trying to sue me. So, I'm not going to say anything else about that. So, all right. So it started as it was the fox designing the chicken coop,
Right.
And so something I had heard from one of the early ISTA teachers, who's a guy who's been around the community for a long time and has no allegiances to anybody, so he can actually say what he thinks. is that each one of those agreements that Cara talked about, he remembers a story behind each of those agreements where it was just a woman that this guy was trying to fuck. And you can kind of hear it in the agreements, how they're kind of like, oh, how do we, okay, we need to put this in place. And that way, when we sit down and talk to someone, we can say, hey, you agreed to this. Why are you acting so crazy or whatever? You know, you agree, you had this agreement or blah, blah, blah. It's setting the scene for a type of gaslighting. You know, it's like, it's making the bed for that, making the table, setting the table. That's what I meant. So that's how it started. And in a lot of ways, compared to what this organization was and what it was doing 10, 15 years ago, it's gotten a lot better. A lot of the things that Cara talked about, the boundary conversations, you know, the like actually trying to give people agency, is somewhat modern and is a good development. But so here's the thing. So there's a lot of good people trying to do this in a good way, but the large group awareness training model, which means that if you're doing this week-long training, let's just say it's a week, and you're promising transformation, so you're already fucked, completely fucked at that, because as we know, transformation, not insights, transformation is not possible to measure in a week. It could be the beginning of a journey that you later understand as transformational. A year later, 6 months even, you could go, wow, that thing had me come home and, you know, hire this therapist or join this group or find this peer support. And you'll see that the integration work was actually the thing that had you change the behavior that would then later be seen as, oh, this was transformational. And you might give credit to that crazy workshop that you flew around the world for, and that's fine. But it's a very small piece of the puzzle, in the same way that going to an ayahuasca ceremony is not going to change your life, but might result years later in a life change for some people. It's a very small percentage of people that this is studies done in the 80s about large group awareness trainings that show that this is actually effective for a small, like 10% of people. And it's because they do the work afterwards. And I've seen this happen with my friends who go to ISTA and other trainings and do that other stuff. And it can be effective. I would argue it's actually a very inefficient way to get that result, because it ends up being a thing where they string you along and it's like a bait and switch. So they essentially kind of create a year-long program because you went to like 4 different workshops of these week-long things in a year. And then, so it's a weird way to like kind of piece together something that would actually be a transformational journey. So already we have to deliver transformation in a week, which is impossible. So the only thing we can deliver is the feeling of transformation, which means we have to dysregulate people, which means we have to break them down emotionally and get them to become dissociated zombies. Now, one of the things I wrote in last fall is I compared the ISTA experience to military boot camp. So my military boot camp experience was at Annapolis. I went to the Naval Academy, and then I was a Navy officer for 5 years. And the first summer at the Naval Academy is a boot camp. It's called Plebe Summer. And I have nothing bad to say about Plebe Summer, because it was the same thing as an ISTA training, but it's appropriate for what we are training people to do. Because if you're on a ship and everybody's doing their own thing and nobody's following directions, that ship is going to sink. It doesn't work in the military. If you're a platoon of soldiers and there's a turret up there and your platoon commander says, take the hill, you all need to move now. There's no like, well, I don't know. I don't feel like it. I'm in it. Did he think he means you, not me. If we don't all move together, everybody dies. So there is a reason for this type of training in the military. And Werner Erhard was famously very fond of the military and military boot camps, loved the movie Full Metal Jacket. These are all things we learned from talking with Ann Peterson, who's a wonderful person who I think you've talked to as well. Yep. So the military is also it's outside the realm of capitalism, because at the top are not CEOs or are not people making a bunch of money. The generals and the admirals all get paid what they get paid, and they're all public servants. And then there's, so it's a whole thing. And then at the end, the military also takes care of you and is there for the aftercare, not just because boot camp lasts an entire summer, but because after the day one you get out of the military, if you don't show up for muster, they go, "Hey, Chris, how you doing? Are you okay? Do you need to go see the doc? Do you need this? Do you need mental health care?" All of that's free. It's all right there. And they'll even make you go to it. If you don't want to go to it, they're like, "Chris, I'm sorry. You need to go see the doc. We are concerned about you." Like I was, my job as a Navy officer was to basically be, in some sense, the parent of the people in my division. Like I would get calls from creditors. If these guys were in debt, I would have to answer for it and be like, "Yo, Seaman Timmy, why are you in debt? I just saw last week you came in, you didn't have a neck tattoo. Now you have a big neck tattoo and you're in tons of debt. So cut that shit out." And so what I'm saying is the military takes a very high level of responsibility for the people that they train, which is the complete opposite in the world of large group awareness trainings and ISTA and Landmark and all that. And so if we put really good people inside that system and say, "Okay, great, you have to deliver transformation in a week." Impossible. So all we have to do is, we have to create dissociated zombies. We have to get people that. And they're like, after the week, you have no contact with them. We also have to make this a profit machine because that's what it is. It's a for-profit organization. The people at the top have to make good money. What also is true is that it's kind of like an MLM model. So to get into it, you have to pay in a lot. So when you're at the top, you better believe you're trying to rake in the dough to probably try to recoup a lot of your costs. And there's only 13 lead facilitators, and they're the ones who really make the money. So that's an issue. And then you have this thing that was you're essentially sold a bill of goods by this sex addict man-child founder who is giving you this system that was just based on him designing a chicken coop. And then you're like, how do we deal with this? And you can't say, "Well, that guy's a fucking asshole. Why don't we?" Because you can't, because he's friends with all the other people in the organization, and we're emotionally tied to him. His name, he goes by Baba, which literally means father. Like people have a very emotional tie to him. They're not they can't speak out against him. He also has a ton of fucking money and will sue people, as he did trying to sue me. Right. So like it's like most LGATs, it's a very litigious organization. We got threats from them when there was a Facebook group and there's a whole thing. So like, I guess what it's like these systems, like they could bring in the consent master of the universe. They could bring in the personal agency master of the universe, but you put them in that environment and there's no way, because people's nervous systems are not online, and people's nervous systems not being online is not a bug. It's a feature. It's exactly what they need to do to achieve the goal. And so like, it sucks because we know these folks that are still in it, and we know that they don't see this because they're wrapped up and they're getting paid 10, 20 grand to fly around the world and get worshipped. And before a couple of years ago, they even got to fuck the participants. This is a great gig, and they don't see it because they're like, but they want to see it. They do want to know, and they want to make this organization safer. And they even have kind of a sense that like shit isn't going well. But to question it to the level that it needs to be questioned means like taking apart the whole house. And this is not the door. We don't need to fix the hinges on the door. Like we need to fix the fucking foundation of this thing. And so we weren't terribly surprised that they weren't able to see that, but they were very willing to show up to the conversation. So we were like, "Okay, we'll show up and we'll try to explain this to you guys. We'll do our best, and we'll even build a lot of rapport with you because we don't actually hate you. We don't think you're bad people. We think you've been sold a bill of goods by a sex addict founder, and we think that you're doing your best and that you're blind to it because you're super bought in and you're like standing this close to the building so you can't see anything." That's my there you go.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I agree more. Please.
so, that I think that there's, deeper dynamics that go on. So for example, I attended that first one in April of 21, and then I signed up for my next one to be an assistant, partially because I kind of got that glamour that was like, "Oh, well, how could I sit on the couch and travel around the world and, heal the world by reducing sexual shame?" And And so there wasn't really a clear path, but the feedback was, oh, well, you need to assist a few times and evaluate it from there. So I was like, great, I'm going to be an assistant. You
Tell
pay a
them how
little
much you
bit.
paid to be an assistant
I was about to say, you pay a little bit less than your
and
average.
the participants.
Yep. Just pay a
Like
little less and you work your ass
ass
off
off.
because you are the hands of the facilitators in terms of setting up the room and being timekeepers and decorating the altars. And you have pods. So, because there's a large group of 50 people, each of the assistants will have a subset of those people that you meet with every morning and you keep tabs on and you report out to the facilitators. Is someone doing well? Do they need help? Are they stuck in their process? So I went into the whole assisting, which you don't get any training. You all you have to do is be approved by the facilitator to do it. You have like one group meeting. Um, but what really stood out to me was at the end of that week, all of the facilitators and assistants are invited into a feedback session. And it is like 10 of us, I don't know, maybe more. And you're told we have X amount of time. Everybody gets 5 minutes. It's up to you how you use those 5 minutes. You could talk the whole time, you can give us feedback, but if you leave enough time, you can request that we give you feedback. And because, it's been an intense week, you get to determine what level of feedback do you want in terms of a scale of 1 to 10. One, I'm feeling really tender. Give me gentle feedback. 10, I'm here for it. Give me the big enchilada.
Wait, let me guess. Let me guess. Did everybody say 8 to 10?
No,
Oh, really? Okay.
no, it was really interesting because I hadn't expected the session. I heard the parameters. I had actual feedback and I just started sweating and my heart started pounding. And there were two or three people before me and they were very polite and they asked for feedback at like, I just want a 3 or I
That's
just want a
nice. Okay.
4.
I'm
And,
surprised.
but I'm the asshole who was like, I'm gonna, the question I had was like, oh, if I'm sovereign and I've had this transformation, do I have the courage to speak the truth to power, basically? And so I raised a couple of observations, and in particular, I had been one of the demonstration people for a very intense ritual that involved nudity and all kinds of things we could get to. Um, and I had felt like there had not been any support for me after doing that. And I had asked for, like, let's process that. And I was blown off and there was no follow up. And so I brought that up. I said, hey, I observed this, that, and then this one was really painful for me because nobody followed up. And so the room went silent. And I said, give me a 10. And the lead facilitator just looked at me and said, I call bullshit. You see how you're making us responsible for your needs? Really, you're not taking responsibility and you're making us the offenders when really your bad attitude is the problem here. And by the way, you should really go home and look at how this is probably playing out in all aspects of your life where you're not getting satisfaction. And lastly, weren't you in charge of something in the this? You did a terrible job. And I did what a lot of us do when we encounter Darvo, right? That I ran into the defense, the attack, and the reversing of victim and offender. I didn't know the term at the time. Um, I collapsed. I was like, oh my God, thank you for being courageous enough to tell me how it's all my fault. And now I can go fix it in the world. And I started to say like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And they're like, "Oh, we don't have time for that. We need to move on now." So the degrees of shutdown and like shaming and power dynamics. And so that's for me where I was like, "Oh, I'm seeing a little bit behind the scenes, and we're getting into what they call dark feedback, which I know shows up in all kinds of problematic organizations, but it's the entitlement to be harsh with feedback and often shaming the person and making it their fault." And so after I left, I carried that, but I also thought, I'm going to go to level two. And so a year after I had gone to level one, I went to level two, which is similarly called the sexual shamanic spiritual initiation. So the first one's an experience, the second one's an initiation. And it's focused a lot on the idea of death and rebirth and working instead of with our personal feelings and story and trauma, working with transpersonal ideas. So, like, maybe I feel healed around my mother, but I can empathetically tap into the suffering of other people and their mothers, or I can identify with the planet as the mother. And so the idea is it's like it's bigger than you, and you're reaching out, right, to things that in my experience end up contributing to a real depersonalization that creates vulnerabilities around being influenced towards, groupthink or group activities or things like that. But the reason I tell you is that I had done three ISTAs at that point. I was signed up to be an assistant 6 months later. And in June, so I attended in April, May passed, and in June, the facilitator who Darvoed me made a Facebook post and mentioned that there was discontent and that a group on Facebook had formed called Issues with ISTA and Haydn. Haydn's the sister cult, which we could do a separate episode on. Um, and and so I thought, oh, well, I want to be a bridge. Let me go find out what the concerns are, and maybe I can help. And so I got admitted to the group, and it was devastating because there were people with stories 10 years old, 3 years old, the last year of, in many cases, having had the facilitator interact sexually in a way that violated consent or pushed consent or created harm. And the inability for there to be any accountability or repair around that. So people talking about all the defense mechanisms, the victim blaming, the denial. And so it was for me like, oh, this thing that I thought was a dream come true, this exciting reducing of shame, empowering people, is actually closer to a nightmare because I've put my faith in people that did not have my best interest or these other people's best interest. That wasn't the actual goal, is to serve. And that's when I shared the experience about being an assistant, and someone explained to me, oh, honey, that's called Darvo. And let's break it down, which for me was kind of when the ice broke under my feet. And I was like, oh no, I've done it again because ISTA's not my first cult. And so the not just the betrayal of that, but the undermining, of course, of my own confidence and trust and sense of safety with myself, right? That happens when we've gone through multiple abusive or coercive relationships. And then that's how I got connected with Dave and the other folks that ultimately took that Facebook group and and transitioned it into the project we call Safer, Sex Positive, and Spiritual Communities, 3SC for short. And I got a therapist. I went on antidepressants. I was obsessed with the Facebook group and researching the history of ISTA and identifying the players. And I just went fully down the rabbit hole for a while. Some of that got put to good use in that we published a Google form to formally collect reports of harm. So the Facebook group was private and we couldn't just take those people's stories and try to do something. So we said, hey, here's an invitation. And we received 54 reports in a few months. A few of those ended up being like either good feedback or mistakes, just like 3 or 4 of them. A few of them, people just said, I don't even want you to use this as data. I just want you to know my story. And there were like 3 or 4 of those, which is really tender. And then the rest were like you can analyze this, different levels of consent on sharing. So some people had said you can send this back to ISTA or send this to Hayden with or without my name. Some people said you can publish this on your website, which proved really risky and problematic, but allowed us and my obsession to go through and read all of these reports and basically create a table of these are the harms that we're seeing, and this is how many times out of this group of reports that we're seeing these harms. And that's where coercion, undue influence, unarticulated pressure came up a lot. And one of the things we haven't talked about is research has shown that the psychological influence of being in a group and what does consent look like if you're in a group where everybody's doing a thing, are you really consenting to it, or are you instinctually staying safe by doing what everybody else is doing? And when you add that layer that it's not even just consent to do a ritual, now we're getting into questions of, am I sexually consenting? It really fucks it up. It really undermines what did I truly consent to, or where was I influenced based on my dysregulation being 4 days in and everybody else getting naked and participating. And for me, this idea of, well, we always tell people they can choose not to, we always tell people they can opt out, is insufficient because it cannot address the research shows, right? You can have 3 people and they'll talk about one line's longer than the other, and 3, right? The experiment. And then you get to the last person and most of us will cave. That's what the research shows.
And it's one of the most replicated experiments in social psychology. This is proven. This is not controversial, unreplicated. People disagree with this. Now, we know this one is absolutely solid, right? In a group of people, you will feel a social pressure to comply. And situations like this are exactly where that becomes or can become a kind of coercion. As you've laid out here, you've actually described an awful lot of the characteristics of coercion. And one of the problems with coercive control, which is defined as a repeating pattern of abusive control and behavior, isolation, manipulation, control, right? That's the anatomy of it. And it's rife throughout LGATs. It's rife throughout cults, gangs. It's all over the place. It's never possible to productively or constructively coercively control someone. And that's a very fundamental piece of information that kind of underlies everything we've been talking about today, right? Because LGATs are situations where individuals have come up with a plan of how to do that. I'm going to control these people into being better. And it never really works because and informed consent is one of the problems. When you were talking about boot camp earlier, That's part of the picture. When you go into boot camp, you know what's going to happen. And they tell you exactly what's going to happen and why. Or they will if you ask them, right? But not this situation, and not Scientology, and not Nexium. And, they don't tell you up front. To them, it's a feature. To the rest of the world, it's a bug. It's a big bug. It's a huge one. All right. But they sell it as, no, this is what you need. This is exactly the thing that we're going to do that's going to make everything better for you. The other point that I wanted to highlight from what you guys have laid out so well here is, you said a number of times that this cannot result in a transformation. Why?
Well, so specifically, it can't be. We can't measure and say that it's been a success at the end of a week, right? It might, like, I could push someone into traffic and they get hit by a car, and that might be the beginning of a journey that later becomes transformational for them. Like, this might
get transformational.
So, say that again. What's it?
Sorry. What is it that actually makes something, like, what's required to make it transformational? How come it can't just be a week? What are you saying? Like, what do you
right, mean? Right. Because it's to, like, that experience at best can crack people open, show them a new way of being, similar to drugs, right? Like, I could, if I'm let's just say, I'm a musician. I've had the experience of smoking weed, playing music, and actually being like, like, I'm accessing something here. Cool, interesting. And to think that now I have access to that all the time, well, I mean, it's like you can open a door to something, but to actually integrate it, and we're talking about, like, deep traumatic patterns, and it's like, to actually do that work of healing it and making sustainable progress, it takes an ongoing support. Like, it's kind of like, it's the complete opposite of their approach, which is like, there is nothing you can do in the span of a week that is going to complete that process. Yeah. It doesn't, like, it. You could roll back the intensity, have a lot of down regulating, all that kind of stuff, and it would be a less traumatic experience. But it's still not enough. Like, that's just not what transformation is. It doesn't work in a week. It needs ongoing support. You need some sort of community, some sort of reflections from, because typically people go to these things and then they return to their life, and they're like, yeah, we had a self-pleasure practice in a group, and then their mom or their dad or their friends are like, what? That's disgusting. What are you talking about? And it's like, there is nothing wrong with group sexual experiences done in a healthy way, but most people are not hip to that, and like, it's like, so you need to be surrounded by people who can give you that kind of reflection. It's like, yeah, like, this thing that you're thinking about or working on, maybe it's okay, whatever. So yeah, I mean, I could rant about transformation on top, but
yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that they're selling a shortcut, and the shortcut,
it's a get rich quick scene, Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. I just wanted you guys to, right?
It's honestly, like,
yeah,
it's less about sex. Like, this group is not about sex. They just use sex.
Right.
Sex is the gasoline that gets thrown on the fire.
Right.
It's like
creating peak experiences.
Right.
And calling those peak experiences something more, investing more in what that experience is than what it really is.
Right. And the things they do, the protocols around sex and the way they hold sex is mostly okay.
Okay.
It's the way that it's the power dynamics that they're unaddressed, and the bad behavior, and then the protecting abusers. There's a lot of things that happen in the realm of sex and sexuality that don't go well, but their understanding of a healthy sex positive community and how to do that, and on paper, it actually is okay. It's not the worst. like again, we could pick apart that. I don't want to take that as some sort of blanket, statement about this group, but it's like that's why it's so tricky, because you'll get like someone that wants to like, someone that wants to come in and criticize their consent practices. And unless we have a very nuanced understanding of consent that involves people's nervous systems and their ability to say no and power dynamics and all this stuff, it's like you're not going to find the kind of shit that you think is there. It's just much more complicated, and so that's why the sex is often a distraction, or it's often just the thing that makes like it goes into that fault line and makes it even worse.
Right.
Does. I mean, I would argue, though, from my perspective, and you spoke to the, baby man launching it, that I think
Child, Cara. He's not a baby, he's a child. Okay, let's give him a little credit.
man, child, baby man, whatever, that I believe it perpetuates, that it sells, for example, to women in particular, empowerment, freedom, choice, but it perpetuates patriarchy and misogyny. I don't think that there is some ISTA's broken through and is actually part of the change that would shift those dynamics, especially getting into level 2. And there's a lot of, um, the light masculine and the dark masculine and the light feminine and the dark feminine. And then those get used against you based on your feedback. It's like, well, you're stuck in the negative expression of the dark feminine and what you need to do. And then there's this subtle piece that isn't always so subtle, that is, well, if you're serving love and you're loving and you can love anybody because your personal preferences aren't really what's important here. It's your ability to be of service and to be loving. And so if your preferences don't matter, then really, isn't it okay to lovingly engage sexually with these people or that person? I mean, especially in level 2, there's a breaking down of the idea of that you know yourself and you know that you like or don't like something. And they're like, well, that's your conditioning, like that you have a contraction around that. Maybe that's exactly where you should lean in. Maybe that's exactly where your growth is. And so there's that constant pressure and the associating of discomfort with growth.
Right. Right. Exactly. Push
You're
yourself.
making some good faces there, Chris. You got some good eyebrows and some good faces during that. There was
I've been doing this for over a decade now, listening and learning about how manipulators manipulate and how controllers control. And sex is one of the most powerful tools or subject matters on which to build, this kind of thing. It's not the only one by a long shot, but it's so powerful because it's so stimulating, literally stimulating, right? So it's kind of body and mind, titillating, sensationalistic. Again, peak experiences, right? Creating or creating the situations so that you can have these emotional, physical, feelings of power, empowerment. But I think, and tell me what you think about this. I think it's the heart and soul of your thesis or your essay on this thing, is the transformational, that a peak experience is not a transformational experience.
and it's also not a problem. A peak experience is fine.
A part. But the confusion is that people think and then go in with this, that moment, that's it.
Right.
I've changed. I'm different now. And that's wrong. That's just patently wrong. You're not different now.
Right.
In how you're going to behave for the rest of your life. And nothing has changed in your social circumstances. So nobody else in your world as you've laid out, right, is going to agree with your newfound viewpoint because they didn't have the experience you did. So you're going to go back like a drug addict who goes to rehab and gets clean and then goes right back to the place where they were an addict, and all friends and dealers and suppliers and everything else is right back in place for them. And so, of course, they revert most of the time. That's why they revert, because the transformation wasn't complete at all because it didn't address anything in the person's life. But people don't recognize that. They don't know that. They go into these things thinking that peak was the change. And I think that, I don't know, that's what I come away from this thinking, God, if there was one thing you could get across to people, you know?
Sure.
It's like, this might be the beginning of something, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, under ideal circumstances. But if you think that's all there is to this, and that seems to be the common fallacy that all of the participants of LGATS, from Tony Robbins to EST Forum to Scientology to anything else, that seems to be the basic misunderstanding or false bit that it all sits on, you know. But that's my takeaway. What do you all think about it?
Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. And I think the analogy, I think John Hunter uses the analogy of you're on a roller coaster designed by people that are not engineers. The one that I like is that, you know, it's the spiritual skydiving, you know, shamanic. You're skydiving. Now, if you told me that I was skydiving and that there's those risks associated, I might go splat. Are the people that are packing my chute reliable, trustworthy? What's their track record? But for a lot of people, I think if it was like, yeah, you're going to have a peak experience, most people don't think they've been transformed by skydiving. They think they had a peak experience. And so it is about also managing the expectations. We talk about, you know, is there a possibility? What would an ethical LGAT look like? Because people are flocking to these things. We want something. We want a lot of things. And so if we think about the techniques are not necessarily the problem. These are things that humans have responded to throughout time, whether it's the whirling dervishes or all night praying and vigils, and they create these states in us. It is our birthright. It is our chemistry. The question is, we become very vulnerable when we go through these experiences. And so what is the true intention of the people that open us to these states? Are they pointed truly at our health, our well-being, our transformation? Or is it more like, this is a great business model, we hope you come back for more?
What are their incentives, right? Like they may honestly go, I want what's best for you. But at the end of the day, you know, if the person packing your parachute is going to make more money if it fails than if it succeeds, are we going to attract good packers? Probably not.
Exactly. Okay, what are they incentivized to do and why? Right. Those are the questions. And when it comes to examining what a leader or a group is about.
Yeah, I mean, and I really want to like really emphasize, like, peak experiences are not a problem. That is not the problem. Having a peak experience is wonderful. Going to Burning Man for a week and is wonderful. Having like walking across fire on coals is wonderful. It's just not going to change your relationship with your parents or something. Like, why can't we just walk across the fucking coals and then celebrate and have a fucking party? Like, why does it, like, it's just the answer is you can't charge as much money for that. And that's why it's just fucked. It's all just
because they're trading on people's hopes and dreams, and it's not
exactly
ethical. It is, and it's it's a sales job, and it's one of the key reasons. This is, you know, at an individual level, it's unethical. It's, you know, it's pretty not okay. But on a society-wide level, it's now so ubiquitous, as you said, people can't sign up for these things fast enough, and they are being sold a bill of goods because they're being sold on the fact that it's transformational.
Right.
And word might as well be just if you see
It's
that
garbage.
connected to
Landmark. I feel like Landmark really did it with that word. Landmark. It's their fault.
that word it's just almost when I see that word with what I do for a living, I immediately dismiss that group as fake, right?
I am actually concerned that the word transformational has kind of become like the word literally, how we use it, but we don't actually mean it. And in a way, like me, because I've obviously made this argument a few times that we need to stop using the word transformational. And I'm actually worried that the word has actually morphed to mean the feeling of transformation versus the actual thing. And that somebody could be like, Dave, come on though, like they don't actually mean, you know, what if I say I'm literally if I literally died, I didn't mean I literally died. And it's like I think we've actually bastardized it that much. And nobody seems to mind, of course, because it's going to sell tickets. So it's like, Jesus.
Exactly. And there's a lot of history to it, and it's a very, very interesting topic. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, for the listeners out there, and for anybody who's watching, that's the point: is you can't shortcut the way your mind works. You can't shortcut your emotional makeup, and you cannot shortcut getting rid of trauma or dealing with trauma. There are things about us that require time and logistics, if you will, things outside of us in order for change or for growth or for progress to happen.
Right.
At the end of the day, all of these gurus and godmen are selling shortcuts that don't exist. Right. And so
it's the oldest trick in the book.
Yeah, it is the oldest trick in the book. And because it's been around for a long time.
It will never go away. Yeah.
As long as there have been three people getting together, two people have been being a bill of goods by one of the other guys, right? I mean, it's just So we're going to move toward wrapping up here because we've covered a lot of territory. I don't want to overwhelm people, but I did want to make sure before we do wrap up here, because we've covered a lot of stuff, but I wanted to make sure we get to any other key points of this story or subject matter that you guys want to make. I'm not trying to rush you. I just want to, but I just want to keep this for a manageable length for the audience. So, because this is the moral of the story, I think, is what we've gotten to in terms of the transformation part. That's certainly the point I wanted to make about all of this today, because that's what I saw in reading your write-ups on this. And I'm going to put a link to it in the description section below here on YouTube, so y'all can see Dave's write-up on that. But I'm back to you guys. What do you want to say here?
So I kind of want to reemphasize the message of sex positivity here. I think as we because it's really important that people like don't conflate the content with the framing. The problem is the framing. The problem is the context. The problem is the unexamined power dynamics, the lack of trauma awareness, the business model, the perverse incentives. That's the problem. Like a group of people consensually having sex in a room together is not a problem.
Right.
It's weird to most people. It's off-putting, it can be a lot. But like as an example, like one of the things that happens in their level 2 is something that is traumatizing to vegans, right? They go through a ritual that is about like harvesting an animal and this thing, and I am here to say there is nothing wrong with that practice, right? I have like processed chickens. I have killed animals for food. There is nothing wrong with that. But the way it's done can be fucking awful if you spring it on people. And the truth is, there are some people that have some real serious feelings about killing animals. And they have a right to those feelings. And they have a right to know what's going to happen. And it's like it's so that example is really good because people get hung up on that and they say, "Oh, isn't it crazy how they do this ritual around what the?" And then ISTA will come back and say, "Listen, we're all eating meat, or most of us are eating meat, and we don't know where it comes from." And there's a lot of good arguments for that, for us to be more in touch with the sacredness of knowing the animals that we're eating. Like that's all fucking great. But like when you spring it on people like that, and you do it inside this context where people's nervous systems are shot, and it's all this stuff, blah blah blah, blah, it's like that's the fucking problem. And all the stuff around sex is like it's all how they're doing it. And what if we did anything as a group, this 3SC group, is that we came to ISTA and said, listen, where are the weirdos too? We are not weirded out by the shit you're doing. We also do that. We are going to sex parties. We are doing all this weird stuff. So we're not here to shame you for that. And everybody else will. If you let the journalists in, if you let the cops in, good luck, because they don't give a fuck about anything. They're just they see sex bad, nakedness, coercion. No thanks. And we're here to say, no, you can do exercises that involve nakedness and people's bodies, and you can actually have that be empowering. But if you're doing it the way that you're doing, it's going to harm people, and then they're going to associate, okay, now we can't be naked, and now we can't have nice things, and we want to have nice things as a community. And so we like really hoped to go in and see if we could actually speak to that, but in a way that's not sex negative, because the general conversation around this stuff is sex negative. That's the baseline that we're all operating on. So we tried to do that. So that's my quick rant about hoping that we
Yeah, I think
maintain
there's
the sex
nuance.
positivity.
Right, there's nuance there, and we never wanted the proverbial baby to get thrown out with the bathwater, right? And so we took a controversial approach, which was versus yelling and pointing fingers. Can we sit down at the table and discuss our concerns? Now we used leverage to get there. We sent them the reports, and we sent them a long letter of what our requested or recommended changes were, from most important down to this would be great. And among the top things were to take 3 facilitators out of circulation who had the most reports of harm against them. Because as you can imagine, one of the other issues that happens with this setup is it does attract predators.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they tend to accumulate power. And there's a few that have even been part of designing ISTA that had red flags thrown on them. And so ISTA did respond by pulling 3 facilitators out of circulation and putting them into an accountability process that they were designing as this is all happening. And we encouraged them greatly to create feedback loops. Instead of being resistant to feedback, how can you invite feedback? How do you work on, creating spaces for repair and healing? We never really got that far. And then we said your sexual protocols have got to change. And that's where they did change, at least in level 1, maybe level 2. I just heard from a participant who went a couple months ago and asked for a copy of the sexual protocols and was told by facilitator, oh, we don't provide that. So they're only verbally discussing it. And then I reached out to ISTA to say, hey, this guy would like those, and we've had no response. So there's, these places where people are trying to get with the program or understand what the rules are, and it's not free and easy and transparent as one would hope with playing with fire, right? It's like, do we have a fire extinguisher? Do we have water? Did we create a safe perimeter? And it's like, no, we haven't.
And that's not a bug. That's the feature. It's like if we had a fire extinguisher, it would make this less effective, and it would be less successful under the metrics that we're measuring.
Right. Which means that they're on a different path than one of safety and security for their membership.
Yeah, of course. That becomes
very obvious.
Right.
in well, thank you very much, guys, for taking some time today to help break this down for my audience. This is a topic like I said, this is a subject area that is new, but I want to say also to the audience, on top of the sex positive messaging here today, that I agree with all of that. And that the problem here is one, as we brought up, of informed consent, amongst many other issues here. It's a pretty key one. It's kind of that you know before you go. Especially
there's actually a term that I really love. I just want to add this informed consent
yeah.
piece. There's a term in the medical world called safe porting, which is really, really useful in understanding how we can do this. So it's not just because informed consent, okay, but what they do in a medical procedure, let's say you're going in for surgery, and they'd say, okay, Chris, what's going to happen is, and they walk you through every step of that. The nurse is going to come in, you're going to do this, they're going to prep the area, they're going to put you under, they're going to do this is going to happen, you're going to wake up, probably going to feel this way, we're going to give you these drugs, doctor's going to come see you, you're going to have a 2-day stay in the hospital. Safe porting is the idea that they walk you through the entire thing so that you know what's going to happen. And what the medical community has learned is that's a good idea, and people probably sue them less, and that's nice. And so I want to look up that word. It's a great, useful thing if you're to create the result of informed consent.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that. It's a term I've not heard before, so I appreciate that. How interesting. Well, like I say, and it's a little variation on another thing that I've said many times, which I'll throw out again. One of the things about cults that people get real hung up on is the beliefs. Scientology is a cult because they believe in Xenu, the Galactic, destroyed everything 75 million years ago, right? That's why it's a cult. No, that has nothing to do with why it's a cult. That has absolutely nothing to do with it at all.
Right.
It's not the beliefs. It's what people do with those beliefs. That's when when you're dealing with a cult or not. It's actual real world stuff. Same here, right? We talk about, like with Scientology, you can have a pack of lies, nonsense, total crap, right? But that's not why it's a cult. Well, you can have a group that has true stuff, good stuff. Maybe it's a little unusual. That ain't why it's goofy or wrong or a cult or LGAT or whatever, right? It's what they do with it. And I think we've today, you guys have talked extensively about what they are doing with this that is crossing lines, right? And really not okay. So,
right. And it turns out fiction novels, you can just read them without joining a cult, like the L. Ron Hubbard. Like, you can just read those books. You can read about Xenu. You can do this work without all this culty stuff. Like, it's available. It's fine. You can go skydiving, and you can walk away and be happy.
That's right. Well, I for one am encouraged by the fact that you guys actually took it amongst yourselves to try to change and improve the situation and fix it. And that's and that they even had the dialogue at all. Obviously, at this point, it's kind of, okay, yeah, they're not really willing to go there, but at least you made the effort. And that I really want to kind of attaboy you guys on that, because that's not a lot of people do that. They walk away or run away or escape, and good on them for getting away. I'm not in any way saying that there's something wrong with that, but then they just don't want to have anything to do with it again, right? And it's the few of us who step up and try to push back.
We just wanted to see if they could take a percentage of what they dish out, and I don't, when Cara told the story about the feedback, and and they're all about dark feedback, and so we gave him like a 3. It's after like a year of prepping and a year of rapport building. What I wrote really pissed them off. That was a big deal. And I had a lot of people come to me and go, wow, they were like, Dave, you really took it easy on them. Like, that was mild. And I was like, I know, that was mild. And they fucking freaked out, because God forbid you could actually take what you dish out.
Oh, no, they never can. No, they never. That's not how that personality type works. Yeah. It's immune to, it just can't. No criticism.
Right.
It's always a good time with that. These things tend to be narcissist and predatory playgrounds, and unfortunately that's what they create, And so because they use certain pieces of truth or certain real parts of human experience or psychology, people can give them a lot more credit than they deserve. But at the end of the day, these things tend to be, there's this group called Radical Honesty, which is very similar. They just,
I know those guys too. Yeah.
yeah, it's the worst, right? It's just narcissism.
And again, and the book and like some of the things in Brad Blanton's book are great. Like, and being on, like, there's some ways, and it's like,
I think that speaks to a challenge that I've had and others have in identifying that they've been in a harmful group, is that we have these amazing experiences or insights, and we don't want to lose that, or that feels very precious. And we think that it has to be a full binary, right? That if I was harmed, I didn't get anything good, or if it was good, I couldn't also have been harmed. And so getting out of that binary to say, you know what, actually both things happened. Both things really happened. I had amazing insights. I learned things about myself and others. I also was manipulated and coerced and not taken care of. They're both true. And I think being able to hold that is part of the path to being free from coercive groups.
I could not agree with you more. And I think that's a key part of what I'm trying to get across to people who are former members or victims, is that it's not your fault, but you were there and you showed up. And so there's both sides of that. In other words, it's nuanced. There's always nuanced. And so in the same way, yeah, you can get something out of it. Doesn't mean net total experience was maybe something you shouldn't do again. That doesn't mean you have to walk away and forget everything. That's never been the point of this, because we don't want people abused.
Yeah. And the thing that, I mean, I know we're trying to end this, but the thing too, it's like, what I really don't want those people to walk away with, which they often do, especially with ISTA, is, oh, I could do this. And they teach the teachers. And that's the thing that if we're trying, I mean, that's my real fucking bugaboo. I want to but please, let's actually see this for the cautionary tale that it is. And people see that it's very successful. People want that. And they're like, ooh. And then they repeat the business models, and then they repeat just the idea of transformation and selling that cheap idea of transformation just to get people in the door. And it's the whole industry. And so it's like, that's the thing that, I mean, as much as it makes me incredibly sad to see the stories of the survivors that have been harmed. It's like the thing that I think actually does the more harm in the long run is the teacher who leaves that, or the budding teacher or aspiring teacher who takes those ideas and repeats it. That's the thing that's rough.
Yeah, that's been the progress of this stuff throughout the 1900s and now 2000s. The sales culture, the multi-level marketing culture that developed in the early 1900s led to this whole sales drive, sales personality thing. And that's how people like L. Ron Hubbard and Werner Erhard rise up and become these sales gurus, and peaks with people like Tony Robbins. Yeah. And have this, whole culture of this. And so people fall into this get rich quick. Everything is quick. Everything's now. Everything's fast. Everything's go, go, go. And human transformation, real human transformation, isn't like that.
I have a crazy idea on how this could actually end or at least drastically decrease. I've been told, and you understand Scientology a million times more than I do. I've been told that Scientology, kind of their ears perked up with Landmark and a lot of the LGATs later, because they're like, yo, are you taking our stuff? What's the deal? Like, they got a little upset. And obviously Scientology, not afraid to sue people. They have a ton of money. So is there a way to have the two tigers fight? Because Scientology would probably just wipe the floor with these guys. There's no one's as big as Scientology. Could we get Scientology upset enough at all these LGATs that they come in and just wipe them all out with a bunch of lawyers? I'm just saying, this is I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah.
Maybe a tough one to bring up at the end of the podcast, but that's just where I'm at.
We'll regroup on that one. That's the
okay.
idea. Yeah. It might be a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
Crossfire.
Okay. Oh, all right. Fine. All right. You're gonna bring in the nuance there. I understand. That's fine.
I have to play that card. Yeah.
Um, I would feel remiss if I didn't mention that, part of bringing our work to a close in terms of the relationships and attempting to influence ISTA was greatly impacted by the New York Magazine article that came out about a month ago that is about ISTA and that chronicles a woman's rape during one of the rituals at level 2.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And so we haven't, it's not that the majority of people go and are sexually violated or raped, but there are a number of cases and situations where that is one of the extremes of harms that is happening. And so I think it's important that people know that that recently came out in an article. And so it gets really bad.
Yeah.
There's subtleties, and then there's places where it's just straight up really, really harmful. And ISTA's response to that article is what really validated that we had not changed their thinking. So they tend to victim blame in there. They argue with certain details or points that are not the heart and harm of the article. They sidestep that. I do think while it's up, it's fun to take a look at ISTA responds to on their website, and you might put a link, but it's a whole list of their reactions to things like being called a cult and being called out for animal sacrifice, and now response to the New York Magazine article. So you can kind of get a drift of how they're responding to different angles of raising the alarm about them, and they're not able to take accountability. They're not able to apologize. They're not able to support survivors. They created an accountability system and a feedback system, but if you try to get your money back, you're asked to sign an NDA with a non-disparagement clause. So while they did pull a few teachers, while they changed the sexual protocols, it doesn't appear that the accountability system works based on what they're showing, and they have not demonstrated care, concern, and repair for survivors.
No, no, of course not. That's completely predictable and understandable. And I kind of imagined we were sort of looking at dark violations like that. And thank you for pointing out that it actually did get that bad. And I will put those links below. So people can check that out. I really don't think, I mean, you haven't given me any reason to believe this is anything other than, a cult, LGAT, using LGAT method. I mean, LGAT and cult to me are very synonymous terms because of the techniques and methodologies that are used. And the intent of the whole thing. So, yuck. I hope that because crimes are alleged to have been committed, that those are followed up on, and that if justice is called for against actual criminal perpetrators in this group, that does happen. And I hope that that's followed up on. I'm sure you guys are going to be on it. How do you guys, if they want to contact you for more information or to find out more about this, how do they do that?
Definitely through the 3sc.community website. We have a contact form on there so that can reach us as a group. And then you can find me at caracordonicoaching.com, which is just my personal business site. And how about you, Dave?
Yeah, the 3sc.community is the way to reach us for sure. And Cara is great at supporting different survivors and some folks that have been through this. And so definitely encourage people to reach out to her for support if they need that.
Excellent. Okay, good. Thank you, guys. Again, thanks for taking the time today to share your story and this information with me. I appreciate it. And I hope that folks out there who are listening to this got something informative, educational, and entertaining out of today. I was do the jazz hands with the entertaining. So yes, this is an entertaining podcast. Mostly on the education and information part. So there we go.
Thanks for doing this podcast, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. It really, I hope this is another one of those examples. The reason I jumped on this one is because I hope this is another great example of how this stuff shows up in all aspects of life, in the places you'd least expect it to be. People think, they always have this idea of cults or idea of cultic control or influence as some kind of religious thing or some kind of, weird sort of ritual thing. But here, I mean, we do have rituals. So it's pretty wild stuff what these guys have put together in this group. So thank you for exposing it and for the hours and hours and hours and hours of work you've done to do so. I, for one, appreciate it as somebody who does this work too, that you guys are taking the time to do this. So good luck.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. All right, guys. Folks out there, support the show, support the channel, all the messages. Okay, good. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.